And if anyone would like to put in the chat where they are, where they're watching this, I'm in New Zealand currently. So anyone else in any far-flung places? Excellent. Scotland, Australia. Oh, someone else in New Zealand. Belfast. Bath. Sleepy Suffolk. It'll be sleepy Hamilton in New Zealand soon, I think, for me. London. Hello, Lucy. It's my pleasure. Thanks for giving me this opportunity. Cheshire, Northeast England. That's a bit of a broad term, isn't it? Northeast England. Auckland, sunny Sheffield. I love Sheffield. Yeah, we live in Nottingham generally. Oh, Nottingham. Yeah. Usually we live in Nottingham. Rainy Cornwall. Oh, sorry about that, Zarina. Hello, Dr. Valtman and Dr. Gar. Right. And I should start and stop doing lots of geographical time wasting. All right. Let's start then. I'm just going to turn off my ugly mug and let you concentrate on the slides with my dulcet tones. And then I will come back on at the end for the Q&A. All right. So again, thanks everyone for joining me on my webinar today called Bullying and Harassment in Healthcare Organizations, a Coach's Perspective. And that's me. I'm a doctor and leadership coach. So I'm going to start by talking about who I think this webinar is for. And the short answer is it's for everyone. But to be a little bit more specific, I think it's for any healthcare professional, or indeed any professional who has been or is being bullied and or harassed at the moment. It's for anyone that has been picked on, put down, made to feel small, passed over for promotion or training opportunities, ignored or even shunned by colleagues. This may have happened one-to-one or in public, in front of colleagues or patients. It may have been by your boss, it may have been by a colleague, including colleagues from different disciplines, and it may even have been by patients themselves. But it's also for every member of every team, so that we can raise awareness of both the subject and how coaches can help, especially at this time during Mental Health Awareness Week. So a little bit about me, for those of you that don't know me. I'm a GP, I'm a qualified barrister, so bit of a warning, it does get a little bit legalistic later on. Sorry about that. I'm an ex-medical director and I'm a certified life leadership and executive coach. But I think my most important credential for giving this webinar is that I was bullied. I was bullied a bit at school, and I wrote that. And when I practiced this talk to my wife, she said, "Why did you put that in?" And I said, "Oh yeah, I was only bullied a little bit at school." And then when I thought about it, I realized that there was a decent amount of low-level psychological and mental stuff at school, but I was actually assaulted and ended up with stitches in my right ear when I was about 13 by a bully. So it wasn't really a bit of bullying, was it, I suppose? But anyway, I was bullied more as a junior surgeon and a newly qualified GP. In the workplace, I was bullied by my consultants, by my non-medical colleagues, by my GP bosses, and even by patients at times. So I get what's going on in that bully-victim dynamic, and I really empathize. I just have 3 disclaimers before I progress with the main part of the talk. So firstly, bullying and harassment is a huge area, and we only have about an hour, probably less now, to do the talk and do some Q&A. So this is just an overview of the subject. Please reach out to me via email if you'd like more detail. I've also prepared a summary of how you can use my suggestions to help yourself, and will provide my contact details at the end of the talk. Secondly, the talk is mainly about how I believe coaching can help the victims of bullying defeat what I call the coachable consequences of bullying and harassment. These are my opinions from my personal experience of being bullied and working with mainly doctor victims of bullying. But I also want to improve my knowledge of the subject. So again, please reach out to me if you have any resources which you feel would be of use to me when helping my clients and others. And finally, I'm not a qualified therapist, so I don't help victims with the more psychological sequelae of bullying, but we'll talk a bit more about that later. Okay, so the main aims of this webinar, as per the flyer, were to discuss bullying in the workplace, conflict with senior leaders, the effect of the pandemic on bullying in the workplace, strategies and coping mechanisms, and how coaching can help resolve the consequences of bullying. So we're going to do a few facts and figures now, and I'm going to start with some definitions. So firstly, what are bullying and harassment? So this is the part of the talk where it gets a bit technical and detailed, so many apologies in advance. Please bear with me though, and we'll get through it together. There's no legal definition of bullying in the UK, but it's usually defined as behaviour such as spreading malicious rumours, unfair treatment, picking on or regularly undermining someone, or denying someone's training or promotion opportunities. And this is usually repeated, intended to hurt someone, either physically or emotionally, unwanted by the recipient, and often aimed at certain groups, for example, because of race, religion, gender, or sexual orientation. When I say it's usually repeated, for me, this is an interesting point. I think it's either repeated to an individual or repeated by a perpetrator. For example, I know of a consultant physician who regularly displays what I would consider to be behavior of a bullying nature to lots of different people below him in seniority, including medical students and junior doctors on his team. In my opinion, he's still a bully despite not picking on the same individual repeatedly. A few of my own experiences include being shouted at on a ward round in front of 10 to 12 colleagues and several patients, having a dossier produced by my house officers when I was an SHO at the request of our consultants of anything I did which they felt was a minor transgression, and then being summoned to their office to bawl me out about it. Being excluded from the operating theatre due to not being an official trainee on the surgical training scheme. Being cursed at over the phone, and being told I was irrelevant because I was only in the department for 6 months. So I wasn't important. So I've experienced most forms of unpleasant treatment at the hands of my bosses, and I'm certain I'm not alone in facing these challenges. I think it's important to restate that bullying can be from seniors, and it often is, but it can also be from contemporaries. And I know of consultants who bullied other consultants, for example, GPs who bullied other GPs, non-medical clinical colleagues, non-clinical managers, etc., junior colleagues, and again, even patients. So in the UK, bullying itself is not against the law, but harassment is. This is when the unwanted behaviour is related to one of the characteristics protected under the Equality Act 2010. So they include on the grounds of race, disability, gender, sexual orientation, belief, or religion. Under the Protection from Harassment Act 1997, a person must not pursue a course of conduct, A, which amounts to harassment of another, and B, which he knows or ought to know amounts to harassment of the other. Such actions can be physical conduct, verbal conduct, and non-verbal conduct. Bullying and harassment can happen face-to-face, by letter, by email, or by phone. In addition, while the conduct must be unwanted by the recipient, it doesn't necessarily have to be that the harasser has a motive or an intention to harass. So it's still harassment, even if the harasser doesn't know that harm is being caused by their actions. And this is important. Harassment also occurs when an employer or their agent, such as another employee or a manager, engages in unwanted conduct, which has the purpose or effect of violating an individual's dignity or creating an interrogating, degrading, hostile, offensive, or humiliating environment for the employee in question. This is obviously a wide spectrum and covers all types of harassment. So as I was researching for this talk, I thought I'd just look into bullying harassment, and I was thinking about incivility, casual racism, microaggressions, etc., and actually learnt a lot about these terms and the definitions. So firstly, incivility is rude or unsociable speech or behaviour, which, while being unacceptable at the best of times, certainly has no place in the clinical setting. Casual racism, or more accurately, everyday racism, are more subtle forms of racism, which often go unnoticed, except obviously by the person feeling the impact of them, and therefore go unaddressed. This racism can include speech and behaviours that treat cultural differences, such as forms of dress, cultural practices, physical features, or accents, as problematic, manifesting in disapproving glances, exclusionary body language, and marginalising people's experiences as invalid. So an example of that would be the All Lives Matter movement, movement's effect on the Black Lives Matter movement, trying to invalidate the Black Lives Matter movement and the experience of Black people. Subtle forms of racism refer to what researchers have called everyday racism since the early 1990s. Everyday racism is so commonplace that it's often normalized and infused into daily conversations through jokes and stereotypes or through unconscious body gestures and expressions. The power of everyday racism is in its cumulative effect. The ongoing experience of marginalization and repression can be a heavy burden, with those repeated subtle comments or acts having a significant long-term impact on the recipient's mental health, an effect I've heard termed death by 1,000 cuts. So it's not to be underestimated at all. It has to be taken seriously. Microaggressions, the term makes it seem as if they're small forms of aggression, but they're not. They are serious forms of aggression, but just on an individual to individual basis, as opposed to macroaggressions, which I believe are things perpetrated by the state, for example. But a definition for microaggressions that I found is subtle, indirect, or often unintentional acts of discrimination against members of a marginalized group. And just breaking it down a little bit further, non-verbal microaggressions are microaggressions perpetrated by an action rather than words, for example, not sitting next to a person of color on the bus. And verbal microaggressions are statements or phrases, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative, prejudicial slights and insults towards any group, particularly culturally marginalized groups. So just one quick example. Congratulating a disabled co-worker for a success at work by saying, "The way you've overcome your disability is so inspiring," i.e. being surprised that they're able to accomplish just as much as their able-bodied peers. So how common is bullying among healthcare professionals? Well, in short, it's very common. I have a couple of studies that I've found. Just going back to the earliest one, there was a study in the Journal of the American Medical Association in 1990, which showed that 46% of students in one US medical school reported being bullied. But by the time that cohort were consultants, that figure had gone up to 81%. In 2002, a British Medical Association study showed 37% of 594 doctors, junior doctor surveys, reported being bullied. And then going on to the NHS England staff survey from 2016. By grade, 23% of consultants, 20% of trainees, and 24% of other doctors and dentists, including staff grade and associate specialist doctors, had experienced workplace bullying, harassment, or abuse in the previous year. Of note, 24% of all NHS staff had experienced the same in that period surveyed. And then breaking it down into sort of marginalized groups and people with protected characteristics, disabled staff in the NHS are the most likely to experience bullying or harassment. 32% of disabled staff reported it in that year, followed by LGBTQ plus staff, 28%, BAME staff, more likely to be targeted than white staff, 24% of BAME staff as a whole compared to 22% of white staff. And women are slightly more likely to be on the receiving end than men, 23% compared to 21%. However, other research shows that women doctors are significantly more likely to suffer sexual harassment in their careers than men. Now, the figures may seem low to you, as they did to me, but as a victim of bullying on multiple occasions who never reported a single episode, i.e. me, I'm sure they reflect vast underreporting of the issue. Now, I've just gone back to the previous slide because I've just come up with this really simple concept of the hospital corridor walk. So essentially, 1 out of every 3 or 4 doctors you pass on your walk along the busy hospital corridor, and 1 out of every 4th member of hospital staff in general that you pass on that walk down the hospital corridor is being, or also being, if you're being, bullied. So it's quite a sort of salutary thing to think about, I think. You know, these hospital corridors can get very busy. So that's a lot of people who are also being bullied that you don't even think about. Okay, I'm just going to go on now to talk about conflict with senior leaders briefly. So firstly, being bullied or harassed by your senior manager. So what do I mean by this? Well, it's something more akin to the experiences that the doctors I coach have described and what I've described, i.e. toxic behavior from our medical bosses, especially consultants, but also GP partners. But for nurses, physios, OTs, etc., it'll be your clinical lead. And what does this look like? Well, an abusive or bullying boss can deliberately provide you with false or misleading information to make you look foolish or get you into trouble. They can humiliate you in public. They can call you demeaning names, put the blame on you, treat you like a slave. They can steal your research ideas and threaten to ruin your career if you don't comply with their demands. They're prone to public displays of anger and attack the person on a personal level rather than criticizing their work. So as I've put in the second point, responding to this is extremely difficult and takes a huge amount of courage because, well, let's face it, they, as the senior manager or senior leader, have the power in the scenario. It can almost feel like a David and Goliath situation. You will feel like no one will believe you if you report it. After all, they have the higher level contacts, etc. They can be covered up. It could be a manifestation of a toxic managerial culture rather than just a solo bully, in which case you're likely to fail if you try to challenge the organization. And it's difficult for bystander colleagues to step in and assist because it would probably leave them vulnerable too. For example, if 2 trainees are in a room with a consultant who is bullying one of them, it's difficult for the other to speak up as they may not get signed off from the job. So that power imbalance is at work again. So should you just grin and bear it, or should harsh or abusive treatment be addressed? I think the two questions you need to ask first are, does the behavior impede you from doing your job? i.e., is it a mere annoyance or an actual obstruction? And secondly, does it affect you physically or psychologically? Some people are, as we know, very adept at leaving all their work stress behind them when they leave the office, but others take it much more to heart and dwell on it at home. Another consideration is how much time you spend directly interacting with this boss. Are they geographically separated from you? Are they your direct boss, or are they your boss's boss? And do you think this boss will eventually become more secure in their leadership role and grow out of this juvenile behavior? Because much of bullying is rooted in insecurity. Do you think your boss has the potential to grow up and change? You also have to be able to look yourself in the mirror. We all have obligations to attend to, obviously, financially and family, but try to be true to yourself within the confines of that, and don't compromise your health or standards for the sake of a paycheck, no matter how prestigious the organization you work for is or how exciting the role. Finally, I think we're at the worst case scenario when there reaches a point whether it's better to cut your losses and leave the organization or stay. And I think if you've exhausted your chain of command, both informally and through HR, and received no proper response, it's probably time to cut your losses and leave the organization. But please remember, it's not a reflection on you personally, and it most certainly is not your fault. I'm going to come to this a bit more later on. So I was asked to talk a bit about the effect of the pandemic on bullying in the workplace, especially in the healthcare workplace. And there isn't actually much data on this out yet. So these are really my own thoughts on the subject, as a lot of this is. So hopefully you'll find some value in it. So the first point I wanted to raise was the obviously, the COVID rates are improving. So, the things were worse than when they were at a peak. So I'm talking about the effect on people working in the office when the COVID rates were higher. And by this, I mean whether people who in the office who had suspected COVID, so for example, they might have had a cold and they tested negative for COVID, or they're hay fever sufferers, whether that led to an increase in bullying by their colleagues. So, oh yeah, you've got coronavirus, and, they're kind of ostracizing them and isolating them and so on. And we all know there's a lot of misinformation out there on the internet. So people have read things and, they're badly informed and making judgments with that kind of information. And the other angle I was thinking about was there are obviously plenty of people out there who believe in the virus and plenty of people out there who don't believe in it. And has there been bullying from their peer groups with the opposing belief? So, for example, if you strongly believe in the coronavirus as a thing, but there's a ringleader of a group of people in your office that doesn't believe it, and then they've kind of got your colleagues to collude with them and sort of round up on you. So the second point I wanted to raise was the effect on people working from home. And by this, I mean whether the increase in home working led to more bullying, for example, through allegations of colleagues not pulling their weight, etc. So I know of a consultant who was working from home because they were shielding due to a family member being immunocompromised. And their manager made it difficult for them to work from home, even though the rules supported them doing so, by not providing them with a trust laptop to work from securely. And comments were made about this consultant behind their back to the effect that they were shirking their clinical responsibilities. Thirdly, are the increased stress levels spilling over into frank bullying? So I think this is especially relevant to healthcare workers. Whether the increased stress levels in the acute clinical workplace, secondary to increased workload as a result of the COVID patients and the complexity of the illnesses, coupled with concerns around health risks to the actual healthcare professionals looking after them and the kind of heightened anxiety around. All of this is creating a maelstrom in the acute clinical workplace, and is that spilling over into frank bullying? And then finally, is there just a perception of there being more bullying rather than a reality of it? Well, anecdotally, I'd have to say that more doctors have reported experiencing what they consider to be bullying behavior in the last year, but I can't find any data to support that, though to me, logic dictates it to be true. And I've noticed Lucy's point there on the chat, a practitioner health. We definitely saw an increase in people identifying workplace issues, toxic environment bullying as a reason for accessing care as people returned to their workplaces in July last year. Yeah, and that doesn't surprise me. And I think when the studies come out, it'll be quite stark. But I think finally on this point, there's also been an upturn in unintentionally unkind conduct towards colleagues as a consequence of the work stress, which when combined with other people being generally more anxious at the moment and hence extra sensitive to negative behavior, may lead us to think that the prevalence of bullying is higher than it actually is. So that combination of people being a bit more snappy and people being a bit more sensitive, and I'm being bullied, but maybe it's just the two ends of the spectrum conspiring. Okay. So I'm now going to go on to talk about the consequences of bullying. And I'm going to start with the psychological consequences. So obviously, some people can suffer acute or even chronic mental health consequences as a result of being bullied or harassed. And the list of them on the slide there are probably the main four. In fact, according to a 2013 survey conducted by the Workplace Bullying Institute in America, 49% of those respondents who reported being bullied had been diagnosed with depression. So practically half of those who reported being bullied in this survey have been diagnosed with depression. Now, some of these may be severe enough to require counselling, CBT, psychotherapy, medications from your GP, or even psychiatric support. With the exception of stress and some very mild cases of anxiety or depression, coaching is not appropriate here and should not be commenced until the psychological therapeutic interventions have been successfully concluded. Now, the physical consequences of bullying are quite interesting. And I guess here you might think, oh, it's the physical side of bullying and someone being, punched or beaten up or whatever. And I guess that's one angle of it. But how might bullying and harassment impact on one's physical health in other ways? So in that same Workplace Bullying Institute survey from 2013, 71% of the 516 respondents reported having been treated by a doctor for work-related health symptoms, 71%. And some of those were for the mental health problems. But of the top physical health-related conditions, many included high blood pressure, palpitations, ischemic heart disease, fibromyalgia, sleep disturbances, loss of concentration, loss of memory, migraine and tension headaches, and irritable bowel syndrome. But there's another layer to this. If part of your bullying involves you being segregated from your colleagues and then feeling isolated at work, loneliness itself can have quite serious health implications. We all know that one of the 5 ways to well-being is being connected to others. So it stands to reason that when we're not connected at work, given that a lot of us spend the majority of our waking hours at work, feeling isolated at work can also have an adverse effect on our physical health. And this includes, rather alarmingly, the same risk of premature death as if you smoked 15 cigarettes daily. Just let that sink in there. The effect of loneliness on physical health, the same risk of premature death as if you smoked 15 cigarettes daily. I thought that was very, very shocking. In addition to this, there's higher background levels of inflammation in our bodies, premature heart disease, appetite irregularities with associated weight changes, and increased levels of unhealthy behaviors like poor diet, reduced exercise, smoking, excess alcohol consumption, illicit drug use, etc. So if we add in the loneliness effect of working from home over the worst parts of the pandemic, then things start to look pretty bad from a physical health viewpoint for those victims of bullying currently, being ostracized at work and, you know, having that extra layer of loneliness added on top. So I'm just going to move on now onto what I consider to be the coachable consequences of bullying, which is stress, low self-esteem, imposter syndrome, burnout, conflict aversion, and others. But what do I actually mean by coachable? I mean that coaching can help these problems by reframing them as being goals to achieve rather than being problems to solve. The coaching process itself is different to the psychotherapeutic process. Coaching is always forward-looking and goal-oriented, whereas CBT, etc., is usually retrospective and tries to solve problems by unpicking the past. Coaching is also a very positive process. Your coach is in your corner. They've got your back. They're usually cheering you on. In my experience of being coached, and I've had quite a lot of it, knowing that you have that support is really powerful. So how would I know if I have any of the coachable consequences of bullying? So he said these things can be coached and improved through coaching, but how would I actually know that I'm suffering or experiencing something that can benefit from coaching? So I'm just going to sort of talk about the feelings you might experience and then try and ascribe these to a coachable phenomenon. So have you, like me, been shamed in public and felt panicky or fearful, or had chest pain, palpitations, shortness of breath, chest tightness, or nausea? That's acute stress. That's coachable. Have you been put down or made to feel small or worthless? This is likely to lead on to low self-esteem. Are your clinical decisions constantly being questioned, or are you constantly being undermined at work? I know someone close to me that this happened to, and this will likely cause imposter syndrome. And I don't want to leave imposter syndrome hanging in the air there, because it's a kind of a buzzword, and it's also quite controversial at the moment. Some people don't like the term. But a good resource that I found defines imposter syndrome, also known as imposter phenomenon, which I think is quite good, as a psychological pattern in which an individual doubts their skills, talents, or accomplishments and has a persistent internalized fear of being exposed as a fraud, despite objective external evidence to the contrary, for example, in the form of qualifications, testimonials, etc. So two more kind of situations where you might be able to relate to that could be coachable. So are you suffering from energy depletion or exhaustion, increased mental distance from your job, negativism or cynicism, and reduced professional efficacy? These are the symptoms of burnout. And finally, do you avoid conflict at any cost, or just do what your colleagues tell you even when it's against your better judgment? That sounds like conflict aversion and reduced assertiveness. Just going to have a little drink. Elizabeth has just asked me to repeat my definition of coachable. It is actually probably my definition. Essentially, by that, I mean coaching can help those problems by reframing them as being goals to achieve rather than being problems to solve. I mean, I think that's it in a nutshell, but essentially, it's different to psychological therapies, and it's certainly my experience of it from a coachee's viewpoint, but also hopefully for my client's viewpoint, it's a very positive experience. I hope that helps, Elizabeth. So how coaching can help to calm you down in acutely stressful situations. So in the acute situation, if it's happening there and then, by that I mean the bullying, for example, you're being shouted at by a senior colleague on the ward in front of your colleagues, hold your ground, feel the ground under your feet, center yourself, for example, concentrate on your heartbeat, do some box breathing, etc. These will all help stop your amygdala triggering and sending a distress signal to the hypothalamus, which controls the autonomic nervous system, including the sympathetic nervous system, which is responsible for putting you into full-blown fight or flight mode. On a related note, this is more about kind of chronic stress. In the longer term, some people meditate or practice yoga, which is hugely beneficial. In fact, both of these, coupled with mindfulness, are now being trialed by the US Army to improve endurance, reduce pain during recovery periods, and better manage stress and homesickness. And I think there's evidence to show that if you are a long-term practitioner of meditation, yoga, mindfulness, that actually your ability to cope with acutely stressful situations is much better as well. So, but for people that don't have a long background history of that, you can institute some of the things that I've advised before. But what to do after the interaction, the immediate aftermath of the unpleasantness? So on the assumption that you've definitely been on the receiving end of bullying or harassment, I think the most important thing, and if you take nothing away from this talk, for me, the most important thing for you to know is that it's not your fault. It's extremely common. And as such, you're not alone. And that regardless of the feelings you're experiencing, there is no shame in it. Because from my experience, I can tell you, you will think that you're to blame. You will feel that you're on your own, and you will feel ashamed. But we know that you're not on your own, because regarding my kind of concept of the hospital corridor walk, we know that every third or fourth person, at least, that you pass as you walk along that busy hospital corridor is going through something similar to you. We just don't tell each other because we feel vulnerable and exposed and weak and ashamed as a result. But once you've worked on the feelings of blame, shame, and loneliness, you can use a neurolinguistic programming technique called reframing to enable you to depersonalize the issue. So when you've kind of calmed after the acute situation, you can depersonalize to see the bully as a human with their own reasons for bullying, which are not personal to you. For example, their own work or life stresses, their own mental illness, their own insecurity, personality issues, etc. And just thinking that it isn't me, it's not my fault. Whoever had been in that room at that time or taken that call at that time, they'd have been on the receiving end of that treatment, is really, really powerful. So this is my mantra for the talk. It's not your fault, you're not alone, and you have no reason at all to feel ashamed. So how can coaching help improve your self-esteem, self-confidence, and resolve imposter syndrome? Well, I've sort of broken this down into 3 areas. Firstly, there's mindset work. Secondly, there's positive psychology techniques. And thirdly, it's thinking about what you can control and what you can't control. So with regards to mindset work, I'd suggest practicing mindfulness and meditation, becoming acutely aware of and banishing your inner critic, also known as negative mind chatter. And it's reported, and I don't know how they've come up with these figures, but it's reported that we have 60,000 thoughts a day, of which 90% are negative. So we're constantly trying to sabotage ourselves. It's all part of that survival technique, stay in your cave, don't do anything new, it's dangerous outside your cave, saber-toothed tigers are going to get you, etc. Change your story, control your own narrative. So Brené Brown talks a lot about the stories that we tell ourselves. Are we just telling ourselves nonsense when really it's just the complete reverse. Work on your limiting beliefs and turn them into what I've heard called power beliefs. So literally flip limiting beliefs on their head and turn them into power beliefs. Practice writing down and reciting affirmations. And while we're talking about writing stuff down, journaling also promotes emotional well-being. And for me, this is really important. The final point on mindset work is don't compare yourself to others, i.e., keep your comparisonitis under control. We're all on different journeys. We're all at different points on those journeys. And we are exactly where we're meant to be. And so, for example, me as a coach, comparing myself to someone who's been an established coach for, 10, 20 years, who's got a massive practice and loads of executive clients and whatever, I'm always going to feel inadequate to that. So just try not to think about it and compare myself to them. So the second set of techniques that I mentioned was the positive psychology techniques. So these include things like celebrating your wins. So what went well today? At the end of the day, can you think of 3 things that went well? They don't have to be massive things. There can be small things, just little wins, just like, we got our 4-year-old to eat all her tea tonight. That was a bit of a win compared to last night where we had meltdowns and that was just me. Every day you can write down 3 things that went well. Practice forgiveness, especially self-forgiveness and the associated self-compassion. And finally, practice gratitude daily. And again, this is a bit like documenting things that went well. Write down 3 things you're grateful for every day. And, a lot of us, I'm in quite a few physician coaches groups, people will say, I'm just grateful for that. Having a nice hot cup of tea, because normally, at work, I don't get a chance to drink it and it's cold. And finally, think about what you can control or influence and what you can't, along the lines of the American academic Stephen Covey's circles of control, influence, and concern. And probably most important learning from that for me and how it's applicable to helping with self-esteem, self-confidence, and imposter syndrome are: you can't control other people's thoughts, words, and actions. So don't waste time and energy trying to do so, but you can control how you react to other people's words and actions. And the only person that's going to get stressed out by overreacting or reacting badly to someone else's words or conduct are you. So just practice not doing that. And that's easier said than done in the heat of the moment. But it's something to practice. So next is burnout. And my goodness, there's a lot that you could talk about burnout. That's a whole talk or a whole series of talks, a whole module, a whole book in itself. There are coaches that dedicate themselves to just working with people who burnt out. And there are coaches that niche down even further and just work with physicians who burnt out. But for me, to keep it really simple, get the basics right first. So create a bedrock for recovery and future success through the 5 ways to well-being. So connecting, being active, giving, being mindful, and always learning, plus eating and sleeping well, limiting social media time, etc. Hopefully that will create the bedrock for recovery and future success, on which the foundation of resilience can be built. So you can build a foundation of resilience upon that bedrock through skills and techniques taught through coaching. And again, there are coaches who specialize in this area, and resilience coaching can include the following. For example, increasing one's internal locus of control, which is where a person attributes success to his or her own efforts and abilities rather than simply to luck or fate. Enhancing self-awareness, drawing on individual strengths, questioning self-defeating thoughts and beliefs, examining new perspectives, and aligning personal values with professional duties. I like values work. I do that a lot. Utilizing established techniques to increase one's sense of accomplishment, purpose, and engagement, all of which are critical in ameliorating burnout. And finally, working on remedying a major contributor to burnout, the curse of perfectionism, which is particularly prevalent among doctors. None of this is easy. It takes time, but it does help. And finally, regarding conflict aversion, again, there are whole courses on conflict resolution and management, but coaches can help their clients achieve goals related to confidence and assertiveness to enable them to become more persuasive and influential. And, you know, in terms of the bullying side of things that we're talking about, you know, if you can become more confident and become more assertive, you can take the conversation to the bully and be more persuasive and influential. And in addition, meditation, especially a type of meditation called loving kindness meditation, has been proven to help people manage conflict situations better. And research has suggested that loving kindness meditation can enhance the activation of brain areas that are involved in emotional processing and empathy to boost a sense of positivity and reduce negativity. So imagine this situation. You don't feel upset, scared, or anxious when someone bullies you. In fact, you feel empowered enough to call it out for what it is and simply not tolerate it. You can actually speak to the bully without your tongue being stuck to the roof of your mouth, a bit like mine is now, or feeling sick, nauseated, or feeling your heart beating and having palpitations, because after all, they're human just like you. Imagine being able to calmly and rationally point out to the perpetrator how they conducted themselves and explain to them how that made you feel. Imagine then being able to advise them of the consequences of their action and suggest how you can move forward together. And furthermore, no longer feeling like a fraud and not letting people make you feel like one. And finally, imagine not fearing conflict, but being able to speak up calmly and confidently. You're assertive and people have started to respect you because of that. You now feel empowered at work, which gives you a new level of energy and engagement. Just imagine that. Whether you're a visual and auditory or a kinesthetic person, try and visualize that or imagine it in some other way. But wouldn't that be amazing? Well, it is a possibility. It can become a reality. It just takes time and effort to achieve. So I think that coaching can help you. If you love your job, apart from that one really troubling aspect, i.e. the bullying, and you don't want to quit because you love everything else about it, but you dread going into work. You have that feeling in the pit of your stomach in the morning before you go to work or when you wake up in the morning. And I say wake up, you may not have been able to go to sleep because you were worrying so much about what the interaction was going to be like with the bully that day. Then I would say reach out to a coach, and for me, would ideally be one who's been through it too and can empathize with you. So this is a summary of my own personal approach to helping victims of bullying or people who worked in toxic environments who are suffering the adverse effects of it. What you can do during and after the interaction, we've discussed that, things you can do in the moment to deal with the acute stress, then some mindset work around the mantra and depersonalizing the conduct. Practice self-compassion. Reiterate to yourself that you're not the one to blame. Think about things that you can and can't control, especially the bully's conduct and your reactions to it. Have a sense check. Try to think objectively about whether the conduct was actual bullying according to the definition, or if it was just an unfortunate combination of your colleague or boss being super grumpy and you being super sensitive that day. And I always recommend asking a trusted friend for their take on the situation. But this is obviously only once you've kind of calmed down and, recovered from the initial upset. Then self-care. Practice the 5 ways to well-being: sleep plenty, exercise more, limit social media time, etc. Self-confidence, including imposter syndrome. Work on your low self-esteem and imposter syndrome or imposter phenomenon, as I'm now beginning to prefer using the techniques I described. And self-development, including resilience building, dealing with conflict, increasing assertiveness, etc. Thank you, Lucy and Susan. Almost finished. I just want to mention the mantra again. This is not a original. Well, I haven't copied it from anywhere, but it's not, it's not kind of like innovative thinking, but it's just, things that I've thought about that are just basic and, they're almost like affirmations, but just that, it's not your fault. You're not alone and you have no reason to be ashamed. So thank you so much for attending, and now just remains to look at any questions that anyone has. And thank you so much for all the lovely comments. I'm really thank you, Lucy and Susan and Helen and Anne-Marie and Lucy. There's a couple of things in the Q&A. Oh, thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Robert. Right, so someone has written, as someone who's personally experienced serious and ultimately career-ending bullying, which was based in disability discrimination, how can individual victims ensure that those they turn to and unmask the situation to will actually do something about it? So how can individual victims ensure that those they turn to and unmask the situation to will actually do something about it? I mean, I think it's nigh on impossible to ensure that other people will do something about it. Again, it kind of goes back to circles of control and influence and concern. For me, you can only control what you can do about something. You can't control someone else or the system. So that's really hard. If the person that you turn to was in a position of authority and had the power to be able to do something about it, and you could trust them to stick to their word, they will do something about it, then that's the best you can hope for. But I know of doctors who have told me that they would be supported by their colleagues, and then when it came to it in consultant meetings and so on, does anyone else have any evidence or any grievances, or would they like to support Dr. X's stance on this? And then no one raises their hand. But we can't force people to do it. They have their own reasons for doing something and not doing something. Currently, I observe the heads down, just pretend you can't see it behavior becoming worse than ever, particularly as burnt out doctor staff have just not got the energy or courage to speak up or to challenge bullying unless personally affected themselves. Therefore, it continues unchallenged and the bullying pattern continues to repeat over time, damaging multiple individuals. If, however, a challenge is made, it's usually then locked down in a non-disclosure agreement, further compromising the compromised. People underestimate the impact of bullying. It's a known risk for suicide. Absolutely, absolutely anonymous. How do we unmask these unpleasant realities? I think my approach, which is unfortunately going to be a pretty slow approach, is to take a two-pronged approach. So try and tackle things from the top down. So try at the C-suite level and the medical director level and the clinical director levels and so on, and work with the executive management team and senior management team within trusts and their teams, and do some kind of bullying workshops with them and lead good leadership. It's just really about good, kind, compassionate servant leadership, in my opinion. But I need to get my foot in the door, and these things take time, and probably a generation to actually make a difference. So the other prong of my two-pronged approach is to work with the people experiencing the ill effects of the toxic culture on the shop floor, at the coalface, and try and help them, while at the same time trying to improve things from the top. But anonymous, Chris Day is really struggling, and he's going through the courts, and he's often having to represent himself and so on. So it's not something I unfortunately can solve for you, but I appreciate it is an absolutely hideous problem, and I completely agree that bullying can lead to people committing suicide, and that's why I thought it was such an important thing to talk about during Mental Health Awareness Week. And if there's any way that I can help through coaching, then I'd be really happy to do so. Is there anything I can signpost you to on microaggression? As a more literal and direct non-English person, this can be challenging. I've sourced some resources. The next slide, the final slide, is just my contact details. So if you want to get my contact details down and then drop me an email, then please do, and I will send that to you. Zarina, thank you for an excellent talk. Thank you for that. Slightly rhetorical question. When will it be recognised that trusts are not the correct platform to address disagreement? If the GMC has a notorious reputation for bias and PPA is impotent and disempowered, until a safer setting for resolution with the power to enforce changes, doctors will continue to feel isolated and worst case face suicide. Caress is a good start, but not enough. What can I say, Zarina? I obviously completely agree. There is a lot of closing of ranks in organizations, and things get shut down, and the lone voice, i.e. the victim, is the one who comes out the worst. I see that. I don't know when that's going to change. And like you, I don't have any hope the GMC are going to do anything about that. But I can say all this with impunity because I'm not working clinically at the moment. So I feel like I can be a bit of a voice for change in my own little way. So we can look into these things together. So please get in touch, Zarina. Suzanne Ellis. Hi, Suzanne. Do you feel that a coach should also have experience of working in medicine if they're coaching doctors or healthcare professionals? Thanks. I don't have any strong opinions either way. All I'll say is that some doctors or healthcare professionals will prefer to be coached by someone who has done the same job as them and been through the same, crap that they've been through. That's their preference. Other people will want someone completely neutral and objective and independent and unfettered by those sorts of toxic experiences. I know of a physiotherapist who's a coach who has a very good physiotherapy client following. I'm only coaching doctors myself at the moment, although I'm a qualified barrister as well, and I would like to work with lawyers. As a coach, you don't necessarily need any technical information or knowledge about what your client does, because you should be looking at helping them develop goals. And then the idea is that the resources for achieving those goals are coming from within them, and they can give you the knowledge. So you don't, it's not mandatory for you to be a doctor to coach other doctors. I do work with the Joyful Doctor, and a good proportion of our coaches are not doctors. And so some doctor clients will choose non-doctors to coach them. And I've been coached supervision by a non-doctor, and that was fantastic, absolutely fantastic. So yeah, I mean, I have no strong opinion either way, but I know that some doctors do. So yeah, thank you. Thanks for that comment, Phil, and Prem and Aideen, thank you. Thanks, Marida. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Anne-Marie. So this is my final slide with my contact details. So please reach out to me if you'd like a summary of how coaching can help people defeat the consequences of bullying, or if you'd like to be coached by me, that'd be very nice. Also, please connect with me on LinkedIn to follow my work. I'm always posting about things I'm up to, Clubhouse rooms and podcast interviews and things I do. Please like and share my Facebook coaching page, follow me on Twitter, and join mine and Dr. Darren Davidson's Clubhouse Club High Performing Physician. So yeah, thank you very, very much. Was there another? No more questions. And two new messages. Thank you, Tamsin, and thank you, Suzanne. Thank you, Adebola. Yeah, the recording will be put up on the NHS Practitioner Health Programme website soon, I think. Good. All right. Well, for me, it's good night. It's 10:10 here in New Zealand. So I'll say goodnight to you all and have a lovely day and a happy and healthy rest of Mental Health Awareness Week. And again, to my nurse colleagues, I love you, and happy International Nurses Day. You deserve to be celebrated.
Thank you, Adam.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.